Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CAM. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for weathering the weird roadblocks and parking challenges. I'm Wassan Al-Khudhairi. I'm the Chief Curator here at CAM. And I'm thrilled this morning to be moderating a discussion between our Great Rivers Biennial artists and jurors. It's been my great honor and pleasure to curate this year's Great Rivers Biennial. It's the 10th edition, and it's made possible through the long-term support and collaboration of the Gateway Foundation. The Great Rivers Biennial is a really special award to us. It not only shines a light on the rich artistic production in the region, but it also provides 3 artists with the resources and opportunity to make new work for a solo show here at the museum. For each edition of the Great Rivers Biennial, we invite 3 wonderful colleagues from across the country to review the applications and select the winners. This year's edition's jurors are Carmen Hermo, Associate Curator for the Brooklyn Museum's Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art; Jen Liu, a New York-based visual artist working in video, painting, dance performance, and biomaterial; and Hamza Walker, Director of LAX Art, a nonprofit art space in Los Angeles, and adjunct professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Carmen, Jen, and Hamza selected this year's 3 winning artists. Before I introduce the artists, I just want to say thank you to the 3 of you. Thank you for thoughtfully reviewing the applications, for coming to St. Louis on a whirlwind 2-day trip to conduct 10 studio visits crammed with Misa and I in my Mini Cooper. Especially, it was a specific time, I think, as we were moving through COVID, when we could finally be together and be in the studios with artists in person. And I think for me, that was just a really enriching moment to remember, what it's like for us to be in spaces with artists and to hear directly from them. We all know that reviewing applications on the computer is only one small piece of understanding an artist's practice. And then, of course, it all culminated with a lively and engaging deliberation over a wonderful dinner that led you to ultimately selecting the final winners. Thank you for giving this process so much of your time and energy. So Hamza, Carmen, and Jen selected the winners this year: Yashon Quo, Yvonne Osei, and Jon Young. So I'm just going to quickly give each of our artists a moment to read their bios so you have a little bit of background about them. So Yashon Quo was educated in both Taiwan and the United States. He received his MFA from Fontbonne University in St. Louis in 2014. His recent solo exhibitions include James Fuentes' online gallery and also here at the Contemporary Art Museum as part of the exhibition organized by the Teen Museum Studies program. Other notable exhibitions include Art Taipei, Praise Shadows Gallery, LVL3 in Chicago. Quo's work was featured on the cover of New American Paintings. Among other publications, he has appeared on Artsy. He's the recipient of the award from the Critical Mass for the Visual Arts and has received a grant from the Regional Arts Commission here in St. Louis. Yvonne Osei is a German-born Ghanaian multidisciplinary artist, art educator, and arts advocate living and working in St. Louis and Chicago. Osei was the 2016-17 Romare Bearden Graduate Minority Fellow at the St. Louis Art Museum and the 2017-20 Curator in Resident for the Millstone Gallery at the Center of Creative Arts, known as COCA. She's the recipient of 2018 St. Louis Visionary Award for Emerging Artist, the 2018 Creative Stimulus Award by Critical Mass for the Visual Arts, and the 2019 Futures Fund grant from the Luminary. She also received the 2022 Stone and DeGuara Contemporary Art Award. Osei received her MFA from Washington University in St. Louis, where she was a Chancellor's Graduate Fellow, Mr. and Mrs. Spencer T. Olin Fellow, and the Danforth Scholar. She holds an MS in Fashion Design and Business and currently serves as the Vice President of Surface Design Association, an international organization focused on textile and fiber arts. Jon Young is a citizen of the Catawba Indian Nation in Rock Hill, South Carolina. His recent solo exhibitions include Carl Costel at Intersect Art Fair, Aspen, J. Hammond Projects in London, LCC Cheyenne, Wyoming, and No Place Gallery, Columbus, Ohio. Young holds a BFA from the University of Wyoming. He was a Chancellor's Graduate Fellow at Washington University in St. Louis and was awarded a Leighton International Artist Exchange Program grant in 2022. just want to take a moment to congratulate our 3 winners. So over the past year, it's been my pleasure, myself and my colleagues, particularly in the curatorial team, Misa Jeffries and Jen Nugent, to work with each of you to produce the exhibitions that are here in the museum today. I can imagine it's been a challenging year, but I think your dedication and your commitment to your practice, it really shines, and the ambition is really evident in the exhibitions that you're presenting here in the galleries. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your commitment to what you do. And thank you for making work that opens up new dialogues and conversations for all of us. We really appreciate the work and the energy that you do as artists living in our community. To start the conversation, I thought I would ask each of you to just quickly give us a few thoughts on the exhibitions that people can see in the galleries today. And then we'll kind of go back and forth and have a few questions to the jurors and then back to the artists to talk a little bit about the process. And if we have a little time, we'll see if there are any questions from the audience as well. So I'll turn it over to the artists who would like to take a first go at it.
Yeah, so the other side of quicksand, I use a very iridescent aesthetic to bring about the elusiveness of like these ideas of working through the American landscape in the American West. And I put it through like this idea of a pressure that we put on these symbols that like represent the West. And then, so I'm inviting I'm kind of putting out my journey to invite the viewer to kind of like think about the way the symbols they use for their journeys, like through this landscape as well. So.
Sure, you want me to go take it? In this exhibition, there's a lot of components that include audio, lighting, and then the sensory experience with the carpet. That's, I think, very necessary because the figures that you're going to encounter in the exhibition are essentially putting themselves in a very vulnerable state as they are navigating their way through reality and the dreams that they carry. The components of the installation are there to encourage you to also place yourselves in a state of dreaming and a state of vulnerability as well, with the shedding of your shoes and the intimacy we have with the pictures on the walls through the tactile materials and the visual materials. So make sure you keep an open mind as you walk through the space and allow yourselves to be vulnerable as the figures are sharing their vulnerabilities with you as the viewers and the, what's the opposite, viewees?
Thank you all for being here. With my piece, Brainchild, it's a 6-channel video installation that's really taking you along on a journey to different site-specific areas that hold significance to the civil rights movement and other kind of racial incidences that have happened in the United States. I'm also really passionate about dress, about the politics of clothing, what it means to dress up and how you can use that as a tool for communicating. And so the fabrics that you see, the textiles, the garments that you see are all specifically designed to hold space and to communicate. I really wanted to create a place of gathering, and so I'm hoping that as you view the work, you would also connect with someone in the room and have conversations about the work that you're viewing.
Thank you. And so if we try to kind of maybe go back in time a little bit, we are here today, but a year ago, we were you were making applications and submitting applications to the online portal for the GRB, then those applications were received by our jurors. So I'll ask kind of the first question to the jurors about, you reviewed almost 100, just slightly over 100 applications for this edition of the biennial. What were you looking for? Or how do you approach being asked to be as a juror in a process like this? What are you looking for? Is there a criteria that stands out to you? What do you remember from the process, of anything that you would be willing to share with us this morning?
I'm not going to say much, though. I do want to say, like, from my perspective, it was a really subjective process to begin with. I think that there's so much material to actually go through. Sort of trusting my gut, actually, was really important, and trusting that also that whatever it is that came out of my gut, as subjective as it was, would be subject to a discursive process afterwards with these two people who are brilliant. Right, so I could kind of let that be as the first rung, right? I don't know if anybody wants to share.
Thanks. I want to say thank you everyone for being here. My fellow co-jurors, also brilliant. Wassan for curating, the amazing artists. Yeah, it was definitely difficult. And, you know, looking at things online is completely different from the amazing experience of being in these installations. But yeah, we were, you know, subjectivity. I think like the biennial format also makes me think about like what's going on today, right? And like what's the context of this moment? Like what are artists bringing to the conversation, and where can they lead us? And I just remember being super struck, you know, I'm from New Jersey, I don't know this area that well, so like even learning from a lot of the artists who applied more about the city, of course from all of you, but then also like seeing the diversity of approaches, like in mediums, in, you know, scale, scope, like just that process was like an education, really, like to be able to immerse in those online forms, which are very organized and probably like frustrate artists, but like on my end, like it's a real process of learning, so.
Yeah, these are, I guess it's always a challenge. And the greater part of which is listening, or getting to a state, looking as listening, looking as a form of listening. But to get to a state where you're looking at work on its terms. At the same time, you might be projecting something like, this is a very turbulent, dynamic moment, let's say, to put it politely. And to get a sense of what kind of dialogue might be going on, and this is the subjective part for me, between what I see going on, and what, you know, what it's saying, and is there something that I'm looking for, you know? And usually it's a thing of like, no, to try and find a spot where it's like, nope, not looking for anything in particular, you know, but to be receptive to what the terms that each artist sets up for their particular investigations. So even though there might be a particular socio-political backdrop or a regional context, to some extent, I feel like those situations, contexts, only go so far relative to the kind of wild and woolly terrain of cultural production that's out there. And that's what keeps me invested, is doing these kinds of projects and gigs, getting to see what it is that you all are putting out, you know. And so just trying to be and stay as open and as receptive as I can, so that I can be, you know, turned on. So, thank you.
Thank you. So if we kind of follow the process a little bit, you know, after you've all reviewed the applications and had this conversation, you come to St. Louis, then we go sort of the next big step, which are the studio visits. So this is kind of a question to the artists. Now, the jurors come back to St. Louis, they do 10 studio visits. So they've narrowed down the large pool to 10. And so I wanted to kind of ask the artists, what do you remember from the studio visit? What was that experience like for you? How did you think about it? How did you prepare for it? How did you think it went? Are there any conversations or things that were said at that time that stuck with you that you want to bring back to the conversation now that the jurors are here? So just kind of throwing it back to you, what was that moment like, especially in retrospect now that you're sort of sitting here as not only the winners, but also your shows have opened at the museum?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me was the clearly quiet contemplation that was happening in the studio. And it kind of left me in like a place of like wonder, like on edge. Like you're like, what is happening? What's going on here? And then when we started to speak about the work, just to be able to hear like your thoughts, and it was amazing to see that you saw in the work what I had been intending to put into it, and so it was amazing. Thank you.
Wow, it was so long ago and so much has happened. But I remember sincere investment a sincere investment in my journey and this sort of openness to really think and talk about all the different aspects of research that I've been working on and bringing that back into the studio. I really enjoyed the relationship with the textile design. I think I had the actual textiles on display and talking about the motifs and how they're designed and just the connections that they have with different regions and different cities and different places, and how to even further that. I know there was a mention of artists in Chicago that I could connect with because I had just moved to Chicago. I'm still living between St. Louis and Chicago. So that was a really nice gesture for me.
And I have another name for you.
Hamza and I spoke very briefly, I believe, at some point over these past few days about how, looking back at our studio visits, circling back, how unlinear time has seemed to become and how circular it is. And I feel that's a sentiment that we all sort of share in the past few years. Looking back, it seems like it was yesterday that we had just met in the studio. And kind of reflecting on the amount of growth for me and through this opportunity in my practice within that sort of circular time frame that seems as though it was nothing is quite overwhelming. And I believe it's through opportunities like these that have given us, you guys taking a risk essentially by selecting us and having the museum put on the exhibitions. There's also a sense for me recalling the visit where I feel like I was very unprepared. As soon as you left, I was thinking to myself that I should have made a timeline or some sort of organizational format of talking points so that I could be a little bit more convincing and effective in my argument that I had to share with you as to why I should be selected for this. Something that I think within that circular time period, I've learned very quickly how to organize those thoughts and articulate those emotions much more effectively.
It's actually, some of your comments are a good segue to the next question I had, which is also to the artists again. What has this award enabled you to do? Has it shifted any of your thinking? Has your work changed at all? Or maybe it didn't change and you kind of stuck the course and kind of started knowing exactly what you want to do and you ended in that same place. Just kind of curious about, what embarking on creating a body of work that is from the outset going to be part of an exhibition at a museum with the kind of award funds that this program offers. What has this enabled you to do?
Well, I think going in, I had this plan of building a space where you could experience textiles and how that relates to architecture, and collaborating with the community, as a lot of my work tends to do. But when I received the news that I had been awarded the biennial, I just a week after that, I found out, I discovered that I was pregnant. And so, there goes, I feel like time, you understand time a little bit differently. Your body's changing physically, psychologically. And so I decided that instead of, partnering with the community and building these structures, I would focus internally and take pilgrimages and understand the culture of the United States, specifically honing in on race. And I'm from Ghana, so in a way I feel like I'm both an insider and outsider to a lot of things happening in the United States. And so one of the things that really pushed me to do this was having the time to, and having the funds to actually go to specific sites that I have read about, that I have seen on television, and really making sense of these important sites. So the funds enabled me to go to 6 different cities and to specific locations that allowed me to do a series of performances and to really open up the dialogue to people that I've never met, and to bring that experience back here to CAM and to further that process.
Much like Yvonne, it did offer the opportunity to travel the American landscape to collect these materials that I wanted to utilize in the work. And it really helped to give me a space to realize this work at a more monumental scale that I hadn't been able to work at before, to create this idea of journey throughout the space. So mostly to push some of the techniques that I've been using, but scale being the most important one through this show.
In my proposal, there included a lot of installation components that manifested in very different ways, typically through things that I was already quite familiar with or had seen and encountered. I was interested in building an immersive space through painting, even sculpture and lighting in a different way. But as the time sort of quickly moved forward, I sort of became disinterested with the materials I was already familiar with, and the direction that moved forward was exploring other ways that were unfamiliar to me as far as using the aluminum panels, bringing up the scale, and along with sort of the craft decoration components that are within the paintings themselves, and how to sort of subtly bring those elements I'd originally thought of back into the space and communicate those in an effective way that is being shared with you today.
So kind of coming back to the jurors, I'm curious about whether you have had any time walking through the galleries to kind of reflect on the original meeting with the artists and the ideas and the proposals they shared with us during their studio visits, and what you're seeing in the galleries. Are there any surprises, any reactions, anything that you feel is unexpected, or a new direction, or something that you maybe didn't anticipate? What are your kind of thoughts and reflections, thinking back at the original applications and studio visit, and then now kind of the final exhibition in the space?
It's great. The show, it reconfirms at a professional level for me a very simple, just faith in artists. You just trusting. I mean, there's what you see in a studio and what you hear, and then, whatever kind of instincts you might muster to say, okay, let's do this, in a way. But to see how beautifully ambition and the steps that you, from what was in the studio to what's here, such beautiful, a step up, particularly in terms of scale, I would say. I mean, just off the bat, But the same could be said, I would say, of the relationships between the artists. Is not something that we were kind of siloed, like your work, but seeing all three together, which is really great when you put work in a room. What kind of dialogue occurs between the works, and this is, I think, is a particularly fruitful situation in terms of a roll of the dice. And just in terms of whether it's a group exhibition or a series of individual exhibitions, in some sense, a real basic kind of approach that I subscribe to, as hackneyed as it might seem, is like, winemaking. It's like, well, how good are the grapes that you're working with in terms of the show you're putting on, right? It's like, you can make a great wine from great grapes. You can make a bad wine from great grapes. That's when you screw up the show with really good art. It's like, but you can't make a great wine from bad grapes, So just looking at the grapes, it's just like, nah, great wine. It's like, they're all good. You can't mess this up. But just the dialogue, just like between Yvonne and Jon about, pilgrimage sites, and a reconfiguration of landscape. It's just such a beautiful dialogue, and then, between, the erotic, right? Like to have that as the kind of seasoning or spice, in the dialogue between Yashon and Jon, in terms of the, iridescent and then the glitter. And so I just feel like, in terms of plenty of candy visually, for people to go, and just a pleasureful show, in a lot of ways. So, just thoughts on it.
I'm just imagining the three of us like going to the supermarket and like poking the grapes.
Oh, no. You don't poke the grapes, you squeeze the grapes.
Going to the snack section,
You don't
checking
poke
out the
grapes.
snacks.
You look both
No one can
ways.
see you chew if you just turn away from the camera.
You actually taste the grapes in the market.
Shame on you. Yeah, I don't have the wonderfully put. I mean, I don't have too much to add to that. I think that particularly not particularly from any perspective, I think that I'm super psyched. The mixture of the work together is great. What each one of you has done is amazing over these last few months, many months, feels like a few. And I think that I'm really glad that, I think that there was actually a point between the three of us to really make space for thinking about potential, right? Like that was an explicit part of our conversation. So indeed, actually to speak to Yowshien, for instance, what you were saying, it's like, great, I'm glad you didn't have like, like a 10-point bullet list to kind of like outline an argument why you should be included. Like that was the last thing we wanted to hear, actually.
Yeah,
right?
the work is already so generous.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
So let us just look at the work and think about it and meet you and in a kind of authentic, if possible, place, right? Which is hopefully your studio, right? So So yeah, I'm just really happy to see it come out, and also, yeah, to reiterate that kind of like outward-facing kind of like journey. It's so beautiful, especially to see in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything that was just said, I feel like walking through the space the first time, I was just like having that impression of like, oh my gosh, how much has changed since the conversations we had, since again the initial plans, but then absorbing it again last night after the press preview and spending more time in it and making those connections. It's actually an amazing journey, really, like the travel that happens, like, yeah, physically, emotionally, logistically, in all three of the presentations, like with Jon's work, these kind of signs and symbols of the road, but also like deserts and place and what someone like myself would think of as emptiness, but is actually like quite full and quite rich. And then you turn the corner immediately to like Yowshien's car scene, this like gun chase thing that's happening that's like has so much energy, and all the details in your paintings are incredible. I'll never forget the cute little Asian American Dolly Parton that was in your painting that was in the studio. And I feel like that last painting with that amazing character singing is totally like her cousin or something. And then, you know, especially with Yvonne's work, like literally the circle that you create with the installation. And of course, like you're wearing, you know, one of your creations right now, and like the history of St. Louis that you're wearing in the outfits and that you're then bringing out to these places, you know, where horrible state-sanctioned violence has occurred, where we're seeing like, and this I think carries to everyone's presentation, like questions about like citizenship and belonging and like what this country is allowing and not allowing people to do and people to be and people to feel, and like to literally like circle yourself and circle your image like with your, you know, pregnant body and knowing what's to come and your new child, and then realizing you're bringing all those histories right back here. Right? And I think it was just very telling too that like last night's opening, you know, there's like lots of excitement as there always is, and the excitement was there, but like people really like shifted to the tenor of each room, and like I think like watching people kind of like expand into Jon's presentation and like take in that luminosity and that like fun texture that is the best thing about an artwork when you want to touch it and don't. Never. But yeah, and then Yowshien, like everybody kicking off the shoes, like forcing yourself to be in that space. Yeah, and then again, this kind of circularity, intensity of Yvonne's, like it's amazing to kind of just feel those connections. So yeah, hats also to the curator, because I know it's a conversation, so.
I mean, the unforeseen things, like, you know, we were looking at Yashien's paintings and, you know, pull the carpet and taking your shoes off is hysterical. Like that, you know, no, that's a total curveball. You know, I just felt like, it's like, wow, I guess like there's an excess within the paintings that's now being transferred onto the space. And so just taking my shoes off and walking on the carpet, it's like, why don't you put on a little bit of Barry White? You know, it's like to go with this. It's like, am I gonna get a back rub while I'm looking at these paintings? so it was such a great, but it was great to have things, you know, unexpected. And the same with Yvonne and the issue of the pregnancy and the incorporation, right? So the idea of waiting, I mean, what does it mean to just kind of combine to, you know, a charged site that's somewhat like portrayed in a very quotidian manner, right? But yet has this history, and then versus like, you know, you're waiting to give birth. And so birth and and what kind of analogies could be born between birth and being pregnant and a latter day post-civil rights, post-2020, you know, period. It's really, really, really nice. So those were just the unexpected. In the incorporation and the use and the where, you know, where did that come from? You know, just so really delightful. You know, so.
Thank you for all your remarks and reflections. I think that's the like magic part, is we go about organizing these things, and then until everything's like in the space and alive, then all these connections emerge and all this, you know, maybe it's happening somewhere in the background in our heads, I don't know, but like it all really comes together, it gels together when it's all in the space, and you can experience each of the shows after one another, and you start to see, like you said, all these connections between each artist's practice, but then each exhibition itself is its own spectacular kind of moment as well. So I want to turn it over to the audience for questions, but before I do that, I wanted to just one more time open up the floor if anyone else had anything they wanted to say, and I'm kind of looking at the artists at this point. Is there anything else you want to say or share or reflect on in this moment?
A couple quick thoughts I'd like to share, specifically towards you guys, and sort of selecting us as a group. I feel tremendously privileged to be able to show with Yvonne and Jon in the ways that our works communicate to each other in such diverse perspectives. It's truly magical to see a GRB that is able to have that dialogue, and I think would have been impossible without you three and the curation here at CAM.
No pressure.
Yeah, I definitely echo those sentiments. So.
Actually, I have a question for Jon.
Yeah.
So I can I'll revert to being an audience member. Okay. And this was actually, I don't know if we spoke about this during the studio visit, Jon, but and maybe just seeing, the work up and out, in the gallery space, really drove something home for me. I was a juror for the Idle-Jorg Fellowship. I don't know if you know the Idle-Jorg Museum. It's actually in Indianapolis, and it's one of the Idle-Jorg Museum of Western art. And they administer one of the biggest fellowships, actually, for Native American artists. And I served on the jury for 2, if not 3 years. And it was interesting, and it took a second for me to figure out, in terms of the work coming in, the relationship between craft and fine art that was hopelessly blurred in the submissions. But the submissions were open. But what it meant, the kinds of work that was being produced, where functionality and so I was looking at homemade buck knives, right? But the handles were made out of billiard balls that had been polished and put together. Baskets, weavings, textile things. And it just hit me with your work and the issue of upholstery as also following directly in that line. And the question is, I'm wondering the location of cultural specificity, right? Not so much in terms of content, right? But the sand and where it comes from, region and the landscape, but perhaps cultural specificity as it's located in form. And in this case, the upholstery dimension, and that being like I was saying about craft or functional objects in terms of what a lot of the Native American artists are doing. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts or reflections about that relationship between, again, form, fine art, your use of upholstery, and cultural specificity,
Yeah, it does play to that in a sense that I was coming up with. So there's this idea of what Native art should be. So in my experience as being Native and then being pushed out into the world and not having this space of a home, I've developed these works in the same kind of sense. It's they're not coming from a space in particular. I'm working, they're just picking up all these little pieces from around and putting them together. So, but the craft, I think mostly has stemmed from a car culture. The upholstery plays to that as well. But that idea like kind of also plays into like the journey, the travel, and those aspects of the work.
I would want to follow that up then, actually, with a question actually for Yvonne, because I think that there's a similar concern in terms of the reappropriation of craft forms, right, or applied life forms, let's say that. And I really would love to hear a little bit about these fabulous dresses, right, and what exactly, and suits, let's say, and what is deployed in them, because of course there's like multiple quotations, not only in the textiles themselves, but in the cut, in the flares, and all of that stuff, so.
Yeah, thanks for that. I grew up in a culture that really, art is utility, art is usable, art is supposed to serve a community, and you wear it, you sit on it, you dance in it. And so a lot of my work takes from that. I'm really taken by clothing because you can tell a lot from how someone is, who they are, what they believe in, where they're from the way they dress. And I have an affinity for clothing. My mom was, growing up, I would see her do a lot of trading with clothes. She would express herself through fabric. So for example, if it's Christmas, then she would buy a fabric that is titled, the title of the fabric kind of goes with the message that she's using to gift, right? And so it's very much embedded in my culture, and the dresses that you see here are all inspired by the landscape of St. Louis. For example, the dress, the flowy dress, the really elaborate dress that you see is actually inspired by homes in Cherokee Street. I saw some children playing. One had a toy gun in his hand. And that really made me think of childhood innocence in Black communities, and how that's kind of almost put on the bench as though it does not exist. And so that, taking photographs of that and then building these photo montages digitally of these children playing, and just the simplicity of holding a gun can actually, a toy gun can lead to your death. It's kind of, you know, where I'm taking that motif and language from. And then, of course, I create these textile designs that are very much inspired by my own culture, inspired by West African textiles, to really talk about Black history and really American history. The dress styles are all inspired by, I can talk about the one I'm wearing now. It's I Am a Man sanitation march that happened in Memphis that led to Martin Luther King Jr.'s death at the Lorraine Motel. And I'm almost, I would say, embodying a proponent of MLK. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the photographs when he died. There's a man that's actually pointing at where the gunshot came from. And so I'm embodying this person, almost as though I was standing with Martin Luther King Jr. and presenting a wreath to him. So a lot of the textiles are taking on, they're taking on symbolism from history and from, and also from today, right? Having that feminine cut is important for me because I wasn't there, but I'm embodying them. I'm inserting myself in there, and the language of fashion allows you to do that.
I think we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and my colleague Michelle will bring you the mic.
So, Wait, it's kind of weird to hear my voice all around. Wait. So this is a question for Yowshien. So I was here in 2017 for the Yowshien Kuo exhibit that actually happened up there. I noticed at this time, for one, the works were larger scale, but also there's less of a motif of black, tall, sparkly shadow colonizers in this exhibit. So, and all the work was a lot more large scale. So my question is, was that a shift, or was it just that it was a smaller space, so smaller paintings were there? And if it was a shift in your work, how did that happen? What inspired it?
You really read very well into the paintings in your description, so thank you. The transition from the smaller scale to the larger scale felt
That was me, sorry.
Hello, testing, testing. Felt in line with creating that immersive space that I described earlier, in an effort to do that, working sort of at a monumental scale. One thing I haven't really mentioned in these talks is the influence of cinema to my practice, and the way it sort of involves us as the viewer, and encompasses our periphery in this sort of wash of overwhelming effect. The large scale was definitely an effort to try to create a cinematic experience in that regard.
My question is to the artists. I'm just curious whether or not you knew of one another's work for this, or whether you had ever visited one another's studios before, once you knew, that you were chosen.
Yeah, absolutely. I have had the pleasure of actually went to school with Jon, so I'm very much familiar with his work, and of course I've been a longtime friend of Yowshien. We've been in a couple of exhibitions. I've also curated some exhibitions with Yowshien's work. One of the pieces that I absolutely love about Yowshien is I'm always focusing on the clothing that his characters are wearing. Just the level of detail and how current these clothes are as well, and just there's a bit of humor as well in how he tackles some of the concepts. There's one particular work that I'm always going to is he made this painting of a grid of hats, and the title was How the West Was Worn, and it's such a layered painting just with hats in a grid form, and so I'm very much, and of course the tactility of Jon's work, just looking at it, and just also the scale, right, of his works is very much something that I'm drawn to.
I think that is one thing about living in St. Louis, is that I do get to work next to these guys, and we do get to share ideas pretty regularly, and it's amazing.
Any other questions from the audience?
What are those flowers back there called?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it because it's a very long word, but I will tell you after this panel because I have it written down somewhere. Sure.
Yes, first off, I want to say this. I've been anticipating this show since I became familiar with the three of your work when they announced the winners of the Biennial. And I mean, I could ask all of you questions all day, but I'll keep it to one. On Jon's, I noticed today, having the opportunity to be in the room with it empty and stuff, how there's really a sense of that being a place. I mean, a musical place, a fictional place, but when you see all those images together and the desert fruit and the picnic table, it makes it into, with all the other kind of mythical images, really makes that into like a space that is representing something else greater than that. So, can you talk on that?
Yeah, so it's a space of openness. I'm thinking when I'm working through the work. So it is space, but it's an elusive space that I've created. It's a space of like attractiveness. It's a space of confusion and trying to find something, but with no actual direction happening within the space. And I feel that's, from my perspective, like the American landscape. There's not really a direction to be pointed. We kind of have to like navigate in our individual ways in our journeys.
I think we can take one more question if there's one more question in the audience. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Lisa, you had a question? Okay.
Thank you. One of the most amazing things I think about Great Rivers Biennial is that it makes you realize what a deep bench of creative talent we have in this region. And so I actually have a question for you, Hamza, which is, we brought you back and we were delighted that you agreed. Hamza was a juror for the very first GRB. And my question is, did you notice something in the evolution of the arts and artists in St. Louis? Did you notice, what felt different, what felt the same? Just kind of how did it sit with you these, this 10 editions later?
I can't remember, someone was just saying with the bench of talent here, and it's not that much has changed. I mean, in that regard. I feel like in terms of the process and the caliber of work that we saw then, and that we looked at now, has pretty much remained a steady state. I would relegate that, let's say, to like the front end, in terms of the work that the audience sees, right? Now, I would be curious about what has changed on the back end, meaning what the biennial has done over those 10 years in terms of, enriching the scene, artists, staying, that kind of impact on the community is what I would, and I can't imagine that it hasn't been had a tremendous impact. But I'd say over the years, I was on the first one, so actually no, I'll take it back. The first one was definitely much wilder and much woolier, right? Because it's the first biennial and everybody's like, it's like, I make drawings, I can win that money. So what we had, it was just like, oh my God, the floodgates have been opened, from like, the tri-state area, which was a lot of fun. It didn't have that. So over the years, I think it has become a known quantity within, within the arts community, proper, and not just this new thing. It's like $20,000. So that has changed, but I would say that also speaks to the degree to which these kinds of exhibitions and occasions are the role they play in knitting the community together, right? They become something of a binding agent, you know, in a way. And I would imagine that over the 10 years, you know, it's now the how it's known, how it's understood within the local community, you know, to the prestige that it would carry, you know. And so that feels obviously, and I can feel that change in terms of going around.
Thank you. Well, I think that concludes our program for today. I want to, again, thank the artists for all of their tremendous work and their exhibitions. And thank you to the jurors for traveling from all of their cities to be here in St. Louis with us again. And of course, thank you all for all of you all for being here this morning and for engaging with us in conversation. Have a lovely Saturday.